Hello, everyone, again, and thanks for joining me on this fireside chat on defining the attack surface, a CISO's perspective. I'm thrilled to have with us Ryan Barrett, CISO at Intermedia. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. So, as we continue our conversation just about how we think about attack surface and defining attack surface and what does that mean for different CISOs and teams. Ryan, I thought maybe a good spot to start is like just from your mind, right? Like how do you define or think about attack surface? Do you think of it as a program? Is it an issue that you're have multiple different teams working on? Just if you could elaborate, like how do you think about that for your role?
I think about it mainly in, well, mainly from the perspective. I'm trying to think of it from a perspective of an attacker. I don't know whether it's going to be an internal attacker or an external attacker. So I just tend to break it into like, is it external or is it internal? I think about the organization holistically, and I think, okay, I'm always thinking the worst of like what could happen. What assets do I have exposed? Is it an external asset or is it internal? And then what is the risk of that thing being exposed? And then just try to like, so I kind of slot it into those categories, either external, internal, and then the risk.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Like for you, do you care whether it's, an asset in your data center versus something running in a public cloud? Do you treat them differently, or does that matter to you?
I don't treat them. There isn't one category that evokes a certain blanket response. It's I think that my reaction to it is tied to what I understand about the controls we have around it and what it is.
Hmm.
And I think that it's just a bucket of risks. And if it's new, then we want to know what it is, and we just want to get daylight on it as much as possible. And I think that, Jonathan, as you know, like as a CISO, it's you just want to know as much about the thing as possible. Like, how does it work? How does it function? What data is it processing? Is it available from the outside? Is it only available from the inside? Like, who's got access? Is it two people? Is it 200 people? How are they authenticating? Is it a service, a web app? What you want to know everything about the machine and how it functions and how those cogs work and what the exposures are and what the risk is so that you can secure it.
Yeah, that's a great view, and I think one of the things that we talk a lot about is the intermingling between good asset management and attack surface, and I think you kind of covered a lot of that, which is as you're trying to make risk-based decisions, the more information you have, the better, right? Across that whatever it is, technical asset, all the way to like a discrete software package, right? Is it authorized, unauthorized? Did you know about it? Has security signed off on it? Um, and
Right.
so I guess do you see those two, going forward, as we start thinking about like the future of attack surface management, are they one and the same? Do you see that they are different, complementary
Which
pieces?
which two things?
Asset management and attack surface management.
Yeah, because on the surface are assets, and so it's just relative to like, is the asset like a really low risk asset that you've architected your environment in such a way that even if that low risk asset gets compromised, it is near meaningless. Even though maybe you've got good telemetry and you're going to rely on detection, but like, hey, if it gets compromised, not the end of the world. Versus like something else that's like got the keys to the kingdom, or it's a web app that is directly connected to a major database, and if it gets compromised, like that's really really bad. So then that risk is very high, and you really have to monitor it much more closely, or some other service. Like the criticality, I think, of the asset um, feeds into the importance of knowing those category of assets. I think
Yeah.
it's just going back to the basics of risk and like what is the risk? Like what happens if this thing over here catches on fire?
Right.
Is it going to burn down the rest of the building, or is it just going to smolder out in the field by itself?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then, I guess to that extent, when you think about like challenges of getting like visibility of your attack surface, and like you said, having all of these things answered so that you can make good decisions. What are the challenges, either you or your peers are facing with this in terms of, trying to say, what is my organization's exposure? What is our attack surface? Do I have answers to all of those questions? Just could you elaborate on the challenges that you and others may be facing?
It's super challenging. I mean, I think in the last couple of years, the CISO's role has become very, very challenging. It's just maybe we've been saying that forever, just as things expand into new services and new areas and new assets and new areas, and especially with cloud, especially with workload management. Like that's a challenge for us, just because we're spreading, and the organization is pushing to want to compute in different ways and manage workloads in different ways. And the challenge for us is like, okay, well then how do I secure that? And what information do I need? And I think the abundance of services, just complexity is the enemy of security. We've been saying that forever. And it's certainly true here, where the more complex we get, the more difficult it is to properly secure it. And that's been a challenge for the security industry from the beginning. And I don't see that slowing down. If anything, it's getting more complex, and wading through the potential solutions. Are they real solutions? Are these real problems? Like, Gartner's telling me, my vendors are telling me I've got a problem over here. Is that really a problem that I'm concerned about? It just makes our jobs even more difficult. And I think to get to ground truth, we just have to go back to the basics always around what is my risk, what is my external attack surface. What's my internal attack surface? It's a continuous cycle of knowing thyself and knowing who your users are, where your assets are, where your compute's being done, who has access to that compute. And I know I'm just like rambling here, but like it just seems like we always go back to talking about this over and over again. And we may come up with different acronyms for it, but the problems are the same.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think, I think, now that we're truly, to a certain extent, defining asset management as equally a cybersecurity problem. I mean, I think in the back we always said, like asset management was complementary.
Yeah.
You look at all the like SANS critical controls, they were always there, but I think for a long time, at least cybersecurity tools and vendors weren't always focused
Working
on
together.
what do you need, right? Like what does the security practitioner need? It was all about, and again, like, I mean, a lot of the ones I've used in the past were, hey, it's great for when I need to refresh a laptop. It was, great when I'm trying to like understand what my total cost of inventory is for digital assets, but it didn't always have a lot of the information I needed to make decisions. And so I see a lot more emphasis, at least today, on trying to get tools in that category, right? And expanding when we talk about attack surface, what that means, to make like the flows a little bit better, be more comprehensive across different like asset categories. Again, I think I personally run into challenges where, you do good with, cloud assets, but you don't do great with traditional on-prem assets. And then you don't do great with web apps, but you do good, with traditional enterprise built. And then, you're stuck trying to piece all of this together, right, in some way to get the visibility. So I feel like there's at least some focus on it today to like, have the CISO as kind of the primary user and buyer of kind of that inventory, cyber inventory attack surface as the focus. Are you seeing that more too? I mean, again, I guess, are you seeing, like the industry evolve where there's more focus and prioritization on doing this well, trying to remove some of these blockers and barriers that you're facing?
I think they're trying to think about it, but I haven't. I think it's still early days in development to really prove out the value for us. I think that we are still. There's so many problems that CISOs have to worry about, right? There's just so many different attack vectors. Like we could talk about this, but we could also talk about like software development lifecycle and like so many other problems that are very complicated, right? And we have to. Some of these are very long lasting. Like to bend an organization into good security processes can take years.
Sure.
And some of us are still working on the problem that came up last year, or the year before that, and those are all long running projects to try to bend the company towards improving the security posture. So, like just because a new vendor's come out with something, or Gartner says there's a new thing that we need to be looking at, I'm still working on other stuff too. And yes, they can all be complementary with each other sometimes, but I just think that that we've got to start like with a clean sheet of paper to understand, like regardless of what everyone is telling the CISO, focus on the problem. Focus on ground truth of where your risks are. Like what keeps you up at night? Okay, write that down. Try to solve for that. Like don't try to just like take the newest shiny thing and implement it. Which I'm not saying a lot of people are doing, but it's a lot of the questioning comes. It can be interpreted as focusing around a new technology, which I just don't think that we focus on. The practitioners are focused on the acronym soup and trying to implement it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then how, I guess, for you in terms of, reporting and communication, when you're, and again, I mean, let's put the topic, external attack surface management aside. And again, let's just talk risk and exposure. When you're reporting and trying to communicate on risk-based topics, like what's your approach? Because again, I think we see a lot of challenges where, the board expects one type of risk view, and then your day-to-day people who are trying to patch things and deal with the immediate risk have a different view. I guess do you have challenges around that, or is everyone speaking the same language? How do you think about communicating attack surface and risk, internally and to all your stakeholders?
I think we've iterated on that approach over many years. I've been reporting up to the board about risk for like 8 or 9 years now, and to make sure we are. So I think there's two parts. Like, am I missing any risks? So like I brainstorm with the security team. I brainstorm with other executives. I'm like, here's what I think are all of our risks. So I'll literally have a couple of slides on the risk register. What are the things that we think could happen, and what are we doing about it? And we just update that. Like I go back to the team and I say, hey, this is what I shared with the board. And am I missing anything? Like, is there a risk here that we hadn't considered? Like, okay, let's add it to the risk registers, a high, medium, or low. What are our future plans to address it? So I think the risk register is a good thing that should be a living thing that we're always coming together and agreeing on, and that has so far worked. The second component to that is like a risk matrix, and that's the things that have happened to us. So there's the things that like we think could happen to us, and there's the things that have happened to us. Like this type of attack has happened, that type of attack has happened. These are the things we've actually seen before, and we are mitigating those with different compensating controls. And so like those, I think those two buckets is currently how we're doing it, and that seems to be working well for
Oh,
us.
great. No, that's awesome. No, thank you for sharing that. And then another question I have, and again, get it like, oftentimes it's a new name for an area we've been working on forever. But, when you think about like designing your team or the type of capabilities you may need on your team, has anything changed? I mean, in terms of like, attack surface management, again, is it this, same teams that you think about? Have you ever thought about creating like a dedicated team focused on, minimizing attack surface, or do you just think of it as built into kind of other operations that have already existed in your team?
It's a good question. No, we don't have a dedicated. I don't think we're large enough. I mean, if I was Google, I might have a team like that. But I think at our size, it's well. First of all, so when we hire folks, we take the approach of hiring really smart generalists. So I try to hire, just continually hire people who are smarter than me, and smarter than the rest of the team. We're all trying to collaboratively hire smarter. And then we try to hire generalists that know a little bit about everything and have maybe some specialties in some areas. And then collectively, what we end up with is a really good team with a lot of, and we built a fantastic team. Really proud of the team we have. Great backgrounds, very broad, and different specialties in different areas. And so when we look at risk, when we talk about attack surface management, everybody's got an opinion and everyone's got a different viewpoint on it. We've got some former red teamers, we've got blue teamers, we've got Linux specialists, AD specialists, cloud specialists, AppSec specialists, and so everyone will have a little different perspective on the risk and what they'd seen it in prior organizations. And so it's like, I think that even if you could combine that, I mean, essentially what you end up with is somebody who, this collective hive mind of people who've seen a lot and can help inform the organization as to, to the risks. If we left it all up to me, it might not be so good. I'm always asking my team for their opinion on stuff.
Oh, that's great. No, I mean, we're only as good as our team, right? I mean, at the end
Exactly.
of the day. So, no, that's great. And then, so last question I have, I mean, it's been a good dialogue, and I think, I always like to leave things if can, if someone out there that's listening is really just kind of new to their role, maybe smaller organization or whatever, and they're trying to get a start on attack surface management, and is that the same thing as vulnerability management, and I want to start a program
Yeah.
or make sure I'm doing it
Right.
right. Any wisdom you can impart, or like, hey, where do you start? Like if they're just starting, took the job on, what are the first like one or two, three things that you would recommend they really dig in on in like the first 30 days, right, in their job?
Oh man, as you know, I've been a customer of Qualys for a long time, and I was a vulnerability analyst myself a really long time ago, and I've sat in that seat and made all the mistakes that you can make around from passing off a 50,000 row spreadsheet to the ops team and saying fix this, and making them figure it out, which means they're not going to do anything because it's overwhelming. So don't do that. Um, I think it goes back to, so there's an overlap here between vulnerability management and asset or external asset management, and a surface assessment. I think that just think about it from an attacker's perspective. Like, I think just start there and just know thyself. Look at your apps, look at your external attack surface. You should at least know if you're exposing, port 22 or some silly admin ports out to the internet. You should know that. like I'd start there, because if you're exposing like admin ports or admin pages or any type of really high risk thing, and that could be an API, it could be an app, it could be a protocol, you should know that. Just that's separate from the vulnerability part. Maybe there's no vulnerability in port 22 and SSH today, but do you really need to expose that to the whole internet? Like maybe they should start there, like regardless of that, of whether that service is currently vulnerable or not. And maybe you didn't even know you were exposing that port or that web app, which could bite you later. I think I would start there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice, and I think always taking it from the viewpoint of an attacker who's trying to come after my organization, and both tried and true techniques that are obviously well documented and frameworks that support it, like MITRE ATT&CK and those, or just your own personal view. If you were going to attack your organization, how would you do it, right? I mean, I think those just lead to tremendous insights.
And you should attack your organization. You should attack your own organization repeatedly, or hire somebody to do it so that you can understand. You cannot secure what you don't understand.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you for your time. This was a really good conversation, good insight, Ryan. And I just want to thank you again for taking a little time and sharing some of your wisdom with us.
Always good to be with you, Jonathan.